So starting way back when dinosaurs roamed the earth in 2013, DoD created the DFARS 7012 clause for the first time. This was the first time that they actually imposed cybersecurity requirements on contractors for protecting unclassified data in the contractor systems. And they created the clause, people accepted the terms, they ended up attesting that they were implementing them. There was no external verification requirement, self-attestations piled up. The years went on, and then multiple bad things happened, specifically the hack of the Office of Personnel Management, different story for another time. And in reaction to that, DoD revised the DFARS 7012 clause in 2016. They now point to the requirements in 800-171, like we talked about. They also created something known as FedRAMP moderate equivalency, which we're going to talk about a little later if you've been paying attention to the news. And they also sort of established these requirements for facilitating incident response in those FedRAMP moderate equivalent cloud environments. We still didn't have any external verification. People were now attesting to a provision and to a clause now for multiple years that they were implementing these requirements. The debts built up over time for having not implemented these requirements, and a bunch of bad stuff happened. Weapon systems were compromised as a result of unclassified contractor systems. And finally, the DoD IG got wind of this, took a look, and found out that the requirements from 2016 were going unimplemented. After that, the Armed Services Committees in Congress found out about the results, and they were not all that pleased. They directed the DoD in the FY20 NDAA legislation to create a rule that would create a framework for holding contractors accountable for implementing the requirements from back in 2016. And what do you know? We got a rule in 2020 that we now call CMMC 1.0. The problem was everybody else in the world was kind of unaware that they were signing up for all of this, and they weren't really aware that there was a big issue until the rule came out and DoD said, no more contracts for you until you did the thing that you already claimed you were doing, but you didn't actually do, because that's why we need the rule, right? So it's very circular, it's very confusing. It got a lot of people very upset. There was a big reaction, 750 public comments, which is a mountain of comments compared to anything that DoD had ever experienced before. So they spent all of 2021 reviewing the merits of the program. Is this actually what they want to do? And then at the end of 2021, they announced CMMC 2.0. During 2022, the DoD IG goes back to revisit those findings from 2019. And what do you know? The findings are still valid, except this time they're cooperating with the Department of Justice to facilitate False Claims Act investigations. Another story for a different webinar at a different time. But they essentially found the same findings 2 years later, and here we are with the CMMC 2.0 rule, exactly like they said we would get, verifying the exact same requirements that were the original problem all along. This is why they say that the program is different. This is why they don't implement or estimate the cost of implementation and maintenance.
So to talk a little bit about those requirements, the original requirements that were in the 2016 rule was NIST 800-171, because it references the current, in force standard for NIST 800-171. Since 2015, when that originally came out, there's been 2 revisions to that standard, right? And so those two revisions essentially only added a single requirement, the requirement of adding a system security plan to the entire requirement set. So, as we have been, putting, DFARS 7012 in place, DFARS 7012 points to NIST 800-171, CMMC is the same thing. It's only pointing to NIST 800-171 as well. The requirement set has effectively not changed since 2015, 2016. And so, they tried to change it in the 1.0 rule. They tried to add some additional requirements with what we called at the time the Delta 20, or what, other people called it different things. But the additional 20 controls, those were pulled out when we went, through CMMC 2.0, right?
Yeah.
And so we're back to the original set of requirements that should have been implemented all the way back in 2016, 2017.
Yeah, it's a hilariously sad story that CMMC 1.0 was like, hey, there are purposeful gaps in the design of 171. We should plug those by adding a couple of more controls and then adding some assurance controls on top of that. Everybody said, boo, no, boo, get rid of it. So they got rid of it. And now what is NIST doing with the revisions to Rev 3? They're adding those controls back in, including policies and procedures. Congratulations, everybody. We're right back where we started with 1.0 under a different name. But that's a different webinar, right?
And so what do you think has happened to the threat since 2015?
No, of course, it's gotten worse. Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, the idea with the 1.0 rule was that they were, quote, opening the aperture of the ability for 171 to deal with threats. Of course, like I said, the criticisms of 171 and how to facilitate it get mixed up with people want it to be able to respond to advanced threats, but then they also don't want it to cost any more money. It's a big conundrum. Ultimately, we have the rule, and this is the reason why it assesses older requirements and drives that issue with not estimating the cost of implementation.